Okay, we are here in our vegetable garden. We call this the vegetable garden because we grow primarily vegetables in this garden. Basically, a lot of the reason we have chosen this garden to grow vegetables is because it's fenced, meaning the deer won't get in and eat our crops. And it also has raised beds that was here already before we got the property. And it has a net in the raised bed, which is great because we can grow root crops in there and not worry about gophers eating our roots. It's something I'm mentioning because when you get into gardening, one of the big questions that people ask is, well, what about pests? What about deer and gophers and grasshoppers and, all kinds of, or aphids, all kinds of pests that can come in and really destroy your plants that you've worked hard to grow. And for us, we tend to use a natural approach to managing pests. So in the case of gophers, instead of fighting with them, we just choose to grow our food in beds that they can't get into. And in the case of other pests such as, again, deer, we use fencing to keep them out. Or insect pests like aphids, we would introduce ladybugs, which is a natural predators of aphids. And aphids is a very common problem. They've taken over my roses before, they've taken over even strawflowers before. And actually the most effective thing I've found for aphids is simply let them be. I've done that before. And over time, the plants and the diversity of your garden will actually balance out, and the aphids end up disappearing. Many times I've seen aphids take over, and then right after there's a wave of ladybugs out of nowhere will appear, and they will eat all the aphids, and then everything's back to normal again. So sometimes things go out of balance a little bit, and then they'll just reestablish balance again, as long as you don't intrude too much, let nature do her thing. She's very wise, and yeah, she'll figure it out. Okay, so also I wanted to talk briefly about diversity. Here in this garden we have strawflowers, and behind me we have garlic and sunflowers, lettuce, broccoli, chard, all kinds of plants living amongst each other. We even have weeds that you can see, those white flowers in the back. Those are pineapple weed. They're everywhere as well. And we are pretty selective in what we pick out. We don't always weed everything. And there's several reasons for that. One is it's the weeds sometimes, if they're not, too crazy, like pineapple weeds are not weeds that are invasive, and they're pretty easy to pick out. What they're doing is they're helping to shade the soil so that it's not baking in the heat, which helps to retain moisture and water. And a lot of times weeds are also edible, meaning we can eat them. So we also keep them for that reason. We might cut them back or yank a few out to eat, but we also leave them just to help with the soil and the diversity. A lot of weeds tend to bring about beneficial insects. What beneficial insects do is they are the predators of the bad insects. Actually, bad is not a good word. They're predators of the insects you don't want in your garden. So again, that's part of the healthy ecosystem, and that's our permaculture approach to gardening. We like to increase diversity rather than do too much of one plant, because that just causes vulnerability to being wiped out by an insect or disease. And the diversity really brings about balance. It also brings more pollinators, more beneficial insects. Yeah, so it's a good thing to think about when you get into gardening. Like, how can you bring diversity into wherever you are working? Okay, so here right next to me are strawflowers, and they're just blooming right now. They've been blooming for a couple of weeks, but I'm basically doing a lot of harvesting now because they're really starting to kick into gear. And you can see that they come in many different colors, and as I had shown you before, they look, when they dry, they look just as they do fresh. And that's one of the special qualities of straw flowers that I really love. So what you see here, if I cut this at this stage, it's gonna look like that dried, except that it would continue to open up a little bit more. When we cut for drying, I tend to cut it a little bit early before all the petals have opened up. So this is actually a really good stage. That's about the perfect time that you want to cut it at. So I'm going to go ahead and harvest. And when I cut a stem like this, you can see that this plant has side shoots coming up and others buds coming in. Keep that in mind as you harvest, because these buds will eventually become a bigger flower that you can also use. And I had said this before, plants, especially flowers, really like to be harvested, meaning the more you cut them, the more they bloom, the more flowers they'll produce. So I used to want to save every bud. I used to be really stingy with my harvesting because I thought, oh my gosh, what if the plant doesn't make more flowers? And I gotta get every bud I can. And over time, I've come to realize that's not the case. I could really cut this down pretty low and it will just send up another shoot within a week. So my consideration is now not to grab every single bud, but to grab enough stem length that I can use in an arrangement or to wrap in a wreath. And the other consideration, of course, is the right time to harvest. And I usually call this the donut stage because you can kind of see a little donut hole in there. And that's a good way to remember that, oh yeah, donut stage, that's the right time to harvest straw flowers. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut there because that's enough stem length for me for what I want to do with this straw flower. Okay. Here's another one that I'm seeing that is at the right state. There we go. And before I dry, sometimes I strip off these leaves, cut them off. It helps to give more airflow so that it dries better. I kind of leave these little buds because they'll keep opening up and has more flowers to use. Okay, here's another one that looks ready. Okay, keep harvesting here. The sound it's making crinkly. Okay, so just to show as a demonstration, usually I would harvest more than this, at least 20 or 30 stems. But once I'm done, I turn it upside down, and I usually have a rubber band with me, and I'm going to rubber band it together. Pretty tight, because as it dries, the stem will shrink a little bit. Okay, there you have it. There's your dried flower bunch. We just take this and hang it somewhere cool and dry. The easiest method that I've used for drying is to hang a string on your ceiling across two doors or across hooks on your ceiling, and then just hang this on the string. And you can kind of open it like that and place it on the string. You can get quite a lot, many bunches on a string. And then you leave like that for maybe a week or two, and I would test it by touching it and seeing if the stem bends. If the stem bends, it means it hasn't dried. If it stays straight, that means it's dried enough. So it's a little bit of trial and error. Each plant has different timing for harvesting. different lengths of time that it will dry. And so one of the things that I've been taught is to experiment a little bit. Cut them at different stages, dry them at different stages, wait, at different intervals, and see what happens till you find that sweet spot of how you want your flower to look. Okay, there's some flowers over here that are ready to harvest, so I'm gonna cut some of those. These are really nice, tall, white ones. So you might notice that some of the strawflowers are super tall and some are kind of short, like the ones behind them. And from my experience, I think that's to do with the variety. These seeds I had gotten from a company called Johnny Seeds, and they just are, I think, a different variety that tends to perform better. And that's really up to you if you want super tall plants or you prefer short ones. So this one I'm gonna cut there. That looks nice and ready. And one more. For me, harvesting is probably one of my favorite gardening activities. It's almost meditative. It's so pretty in the sunshine. Shiny and gorgeous.